very good morning, Honorable Minister. And thank you, Ronald, for the kind introduction. And a warm and a thank you to the PNG Corps for inviting me to speak today. We have 5 minutes, and Ronald promised me he would be very strict about that, so I will keep it very short. The good news is I have only 5 slides, so we can breeze through it. And the other good news is the Honorable Minister already covered in his speech much of the content of this first slide, which is what are the benefits of self-generation of electricity for Papua New Guinea. And the reason we started this exercise earlier this year was to try and understand what it would take for Papua New Guinea to have a thriving industry of solar self-generation. I think the benefits are well known. We see a lot more investment in electricity generation, and the cost to consumers of electricity would potentially go down if there was more solar self-generation happening. But at the same time, we would see increased reliability for our consumers. This could also be a way to increase the government's goals of increasing electrification and the reach of the grid, as well as reducing the carbon emissions from our solar efforts. So I think the benefits are well understood, the benefits are well quantified, and are very much in line with the government's objectives and the government's vision as outlined by the Honorable Minister. And so what we wanted to understand is what's really stopping the potential growth of self-generation. Why are people not investing in generating their own solar power, and what can be done to actually take it forward? And so we wanted to test this assumption. Perhaps one of the assumptions we wanted to test is it lower cost, really? Is it really lower cost because we'd still have to import our solar panels, we'd still have to set up, we'd still have to import the skills necessary to operate and maintain them. So we wanted to take a look, and we did some modeling to see whether solar power generation in PNG, if I were to put a solar panel on my rooftop, would really reduce cost for me. And we wanted to compare it against various different scenarios. We do note that there's a lot of uncertainty out there, because for the existing private sector, the opportunity cost, or the alternative that they currently have, is to use their own diesel generator in the case of outages. So the price of diesel is one of the main variable costs that they have to take into consideration when deciding to invest in solar. And at the time we did this analysis, the cost of diesel was very high, but we do know that it's subject to market forces, so there's tremendous variability there. The second variability is that for the installation of solar panels and batteries, the costs in PNG are still not well established because the market is still small. And so there is some variation in there. But what we see is that whether you're talking about, maybe I'll try and use the pointer, if you're talking about just the solar, or you're talking about solar supported by batteries, the levelized cost of electricity generation is always lower than maintaining your own diesel generator. So that's good news. So that means that it makes economic sense for the private sector to invest. Then we wanted to test what are the right scenarios. There are various different scenarios in which solar could be deployed. There is a status quo where solar is allowed for self-generation only in the case of outages. But there are more advanced models that we know out there, which is I could generate solar and sell it back to the grid. So we wanted to understand what are the potential impacts, the savings, and what does that mean for the private sector in various different scenarios. And the first thing that we looked at is the status quo, generating solar power for my own use in the case of outages. I'm not connecting my solar to the grid, it's just connected to my own connection, and I only use it in the case of outages. And what we found very interestingly is that it makes economic sense if the number of outage hours is more than 4. So if during the day I have more than 4 hours of outages, then I will invest in having a solar panel. Otherwise, I'm better off having just a diesel generator. And 4 hours of outages during the day is quite a big chunk of time. So what this tells us is that in the status quo, it may not make sense for an investor to actually sink money into investing in setting up their own solar rooftops. So then we wanted to ask, okay, what if I could use that power, not just during outages, but also during the day? And there are some benefits to that the industry told us. For example, the stability of the electricity connection can be enhanced by your solar power. So the impact of fluctuations on your business is significantly limited as a result of having the solar power. And there's a lot of numbers on this slide, so I will try and summarize. But what we did is we looked at what is the total roof area in Port Moresby and Leh. And if 5% of that roof area were to be used for solar, these solar panels could generate about 94 gigawatt hours per year. We compared that to PPL's annual generation, which is about 4.95 terawatt hours. So this amounts to about 1 to 2%. If only 5% of rooftops were used for solar, that's 1 to 2% of PPL's actual generation around the year. But what we also found is in the various cost scenarios, solar always leads to savings in most cases, except for industrial tariffs in the low estimate. In most cases, you're looking at savings in the range of 1,000 kina to about 2,000 kina per year for any customer who's spending about 10,000 kilowatt hours. So there's a lot of potential for savings that do exist. And in the final scenario, you want to look at what happens if you're allowed to sell some of this energy back to PPL. And what we found is that if you have an excess generation of about 25 gigawatt hours, and you sell that back, then the potential losses to PPL's revenue can actually be offset by actually sharing the benefits between the generator and PPL. So the final step is we wanted to understand why it's not happening. And is there any regulatory challenges that the government can undertake can remove to enable self-generation to happen? And what we learned is that there is no bar, but there's a lack of clarity. And I think what we've learned from global experience is that if there's a bar, it's easier for government to remove. If there's a lack of clarity, that's often more difficult for government to provide. So what we learned in our engagement with the private sector and through our analysis is that most consumers still believe that it is illegal to generate your own electricity if you are in a grid-connected area, other than only for backup during outages. And we wanted to see why, and why did this opinion come about? And so we looked at all the underlying laws, the regulations, NEA Act, as well as PPL's retail license, which only specifies that there is exclusivity if you are selling back to the grid. So if we're going to go for scenario 3 in this analysis, which is where we allow people to self-generate and sell back, we'll need to look at that license condition. But in the absence of that, even just to start the self-generation journey, there is no legal bar to actually doing that. The private sector can set up their own solar panels on their rooftop and use that power for their own usage. But there is that lack of clarity that exists, and so we understand that the Office of the Prime Minister has already requested the state solicitor to provide a legal opinion to outline whether this is their interpretation of the law. And it's our belief that once that regulation is out there and that clarity is provided, we'll start seeing a growth in solar self-generation investments by the private sector, which we at the IFC would be quite keen to support. But at the same time, that gives us the opportunity to start dialogue and work with NEA and with the ministry to think about how we incorporate technical requirements and other offtake terms to allow for sale of the excess electricity to the grid as well. So thanks very much again for allowing us to come and share the findings of our study with you today. This is the start of a journey, and this is a great opportunity to discuss this in the presence of the minister, in the presence of our esteemed colleagues from the Energy Regulatory Authority, and we look forward to working with you to make this happen going forward. Thank you very much.